ever get that feeling like, that your life is just a series of pre-programmed events? Like you're just kind of following a script.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a weird feeling, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the jumping off point for our deep dive today, actually. We're tackling, the age-old question, really. Do we really have free will?
It's a question that's been debated for centuries, and it really can get pretty mind-bending once you start, really digging into it.
For sure.
Yeah.
We've got a whole stack of sources here, everything from, philosophy forums to scientific articles, even a blog post that uses this wild thought experiment about an android who thinks he's Indiana Jones.
And an interesting thing is that, these sources don't all agree. Some are, firmly on the side of free will, while others argue it's all an illusion.
Right. So our mission today is to kind of sort through all these different perspectives and see if we can get a clearer picture of what's really going on.
Yeah.
Where should we even start with something this big?
Well, I think we should go back to the basics. Philosophers have been wrestling with this question for ages, and surprisingly, most of them actually believe in some form of free will.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
I always thought philosophers were all about proving that, we're just puppets on a string.
Right, yeah. That's a common misconception. You see, a lot of the arguments against free will, they rely on this idea of determinism. And basically, determinism means that every event is caused by previous events, kind of like a chain reaction going all the way back to the Big Bang.
Okay.
So if that's true, the argument goes that, all of our choices are already predetermined. But a lot of philosophers, they argue that even if determinism is true, we can still have free will.
Okay, now that's where I get lost.
Yeah.
How can you have both? If everything's determined, how can we be free to choose?
Yeah, so that's where compatibilism comes in. It's a pretty nuanced view, but essentially what it argues is that free will isn't about escaping all causes. It's more about whether our actions are, aligning with our own desires and reasoning.
So for a compatibilist, it's more about whether you're acting on your own internal motivations, even if those motivations were, themselves kind of shaped by external factors.
Exactly. Imagine you're at a party and there's a table full of, delicious desserts, and you really want to eat that triple chocolate cake, but you also know you probably shouldn't.
Oh, this is already getting relatable. The struggle is real.
Right.
Yeah.
So compatibilists would say that if you ultimately decide to eat the cake because you simply can't resist, you're still exercising free will, even though your desire for cake was influenced by things like the environment, your upbringing, or even just plain old biology. You weighed your options, you considered the consequences, and ultimately you acted in accordance with your strongest desire.
That makes sense. It's not about some magical ability to defy the laws of physics, but more about whether your actions genuinely reflect your inner state.
Yeah.
But what about those who completely reject determinism?
Right. Those are the libertarians. They believe we have a kind of radical free will that's totally independent of any prior causes.
Yeah.
They argue that our choices, they can't be predicted or explained by any chain of events.
So they would say that even if we knew absolutely everything about a person's past, their brain chemistry, their environment, we still couldn't perfectly predict what they'd choose.
Yep, that's the basic idea. It's a pretty bold claim, and it's hard to find scientific evidence to support it.
Well, speaking of science, I've always wondered how physics plays into all of this. Does the universe itself support the idea of free will, or does it suggest that we're all just along for the ride?
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting because physics, especially quantum mechanics, it throws a bit of a wrench into the whole determinism argument.
Okay, I've always found quantum physics to be a little mind-blowing, to be honest. Can you break it down for us?
Sure. So classical physics, which is what we mostly experience in our, everyday lives, it operates on the principle of cause and effect. If you know the initial conditions of a system, you can theoretically predict its future state with perfect accuracy. But quantum mechanics introduces this element of randomness into the picture.
So instead of everything being predictable, there's an element of chance at the subatomic level.
Exactly. At the level of particles, things aren't so clear-cut. We can talk about, probabilities, possibilities, but we can't say for certain what a given particle will do.
Okay.
It's almost like there's a built-in uncertainty to the fabric of reality.
Wow, so even the universe itself might not be completely deterministic.
Yeah.
Does that mean that our choices could be influenced by this quantum randomness, giving us a genuine free will?
It's tempting to think so, but there's a catch. Even if there is randomness at the subatomic level, um, it doesn't necessarily translate to randomness at the level of human decision making.
Hold on. How can that be? If there's fundamental randomness, shouldn't that affect everything?
Well, think about it this way. Our brains are, they're incredibly complex systems made up of billions of neurons. So even if there's some quantum randomness affecting individual particles in our brains, the sheer number of interactions involved, it essentially cancels out any significant impact on our overall decision-making processes.
So even with quantum mechanics in the mix, it sounds like we're still kind of stuck with the question of, how much control we really have.
Right. And that leads to another really intriguing idea. Maybe free will isn't an all or nothing thing. What if it exists in degrees?
Degrees of free will. That's a new one for me. What makes you think that's possible?
Well, think about things like mental illness, or deception, or even just like ingrained habits and biases. Do these factors, do they like completely eliminate free will, or do they just kind of limit it in certain ways?
That's a really good point. If someone's struggling with a mental illness that affects their decision making, it's pretty clear that they're not operating with the same level of free will as someone who isn't.
Exactly. And this idea of, like a spectrum of free will, it's further supported by the fact that we can consciously work to improve our decision making. If we can overcome biases, sharpen our reasoning skills and make more informed choices, doesn't that suggest that we can increase our degree of free will?
It definitely seems that way. This whole idea of free will by degrees really makes you think about how much agency we truly have. But how does this play out in the real world? Beyond all the philosophy and theoretical physics.
Yeah, well, that's where things get really practical. Courts of law and medical ethics boards, they offer some really fascinating insights into how we actually define and apply this concept of free will in everyday life.
Okay, so we're moving from the abstract to the concrete. I'm curious to hear what those practical applications look like.
Well, think about legal concepts like informed consent, coercion, and the insanity defense. They all show that we care deeply about whether someone's will was genuinely their own, or if it was manipulated or compromised in some way. We even have laws against things like rape by deception, which emphasizes the importance of genuine informed consent.
So in these real world situations, we're not so focused on whether someone's actions were like predetermined by physics, but more on whether they were acting authentically and without undue influence.
Exactly, and examining these practical examples, it can really help us understand the philosophical debate in a more concrete way.
It's amazing how something as complex as free will, like, shows up in our legal systems and ethical codes. It really highlights how deeply this concept is kind of woven into the fabric of society. But speaking of concrete examples, one of our sources, it uses this pretty wild thought experiment to illustrate this point. It involves a sentient android who's been programmed to believe he's Indiana Jones.
Ah, yes, the android Indiana Jones. It's a great example of how even a seemingly complex and independent being can be manipulated and deprived of genuine free will.
An android Indiana Jones. Okay, you've got my attention. Tell me more.
Well, so this android is part of a very ethically questionable scenario. He's programmed to believe that every woman he encounters is Marion Ravenwood, and he's kept from ever discovering the truth about his situation.
So he's essentially living in a manufactured reality, like completely unaware that he's being controlled.
Exactly, and the source argues that this android, he's a prime example of someone who lacks free will, even though he might appear to be making his own choices. He's being deliberately deceived and prevented from exercising genuine autonomy.
That's a really disturbing thought. It makes you wonder about the role of knowledge and awareness and free will. If you're systematically misled about the nature of reality, can you truly be said to be to be acting freely.
It's a crucial point. It highlights why simply observing someone's actions isn't enough to determine if they're acting freely. We need to consider the information they have access to, their ability to reason and evaluate choices, and whether they're being subjected to any form of coercion or manipulation.
It's like that line from The Matrix. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged, and many of them are so inured, so hopelessly dependent on the system that they will fight to protect it.
That's a great analogy, and in a way, that's what makes the debate about free will so compelling. It forces us to confront the limits of our own knowledge and the possibility that we might be more influenced by external factors than we realize.
It's both humbling and a bit unsettling. But
Yep.
let's get back to the android for a moment. What happens to him in this scenario? Is he like stuck in his Indiana Jones fantasy forever?
Thankfully, no. In the thought experiment, he's eventually rescued by a group of people who recognize that he's being exploited.
Okay, good. I was getting worried about our android friend, but wait, wouldn't those rescuers also be violating his free will by intervening? I mean, he thinks he wants to be there.
Yeah, that's where it gets even more complex. The source they use this dilemma to explore the complexities of restoring someone's autonomy after it's been compromised. They asked, how can you free someone who doesn't even realize that they're not free?
It's a real head scratcher if they simply reprogram him to understand the truth. Wouldn't they just be replacing one form of manipulation with another?
Precisely, and there's no easy answer to that question. It really highlights the delicate balance between respecting someone's current desires, even if they're based on false information, and helping them access the knowledge and reasoning skills they need to make truly autonomous choices.
It's a real ethical tightrope walk.
Mm.
But ultimately, I think we'd all agree that rescuing the android from his manufactured reality is the right thing to do, even if it means temporarily overriding his perceived desires.
I agree. After all, the goal is to empower him to make his own choices based on a clear understanding of reality, not to simply replace one set of programming with another.
It all comes back to that concept of degrees of free will, right? The rescuers are essentially trying to help him move further along that spectrum towards greater autonomy.
Exactly, and that's why this thought experiment is so powerful. It provides a really vivid illustration of how free will can be compromised, how it can be restored, and the ethical considerations involved in that process.
It's a great example of how science fiction can help us grapple with complex philosophical questions in a way that's both engaging and accessible.
Absolutely, and it reminds us that the debate about free will isn't just some abstract intellectual exercise. It has real world implications for how we understand and interact with each other, how we design our societies, and how we navigate the ethical challenges of emerging technologies.
So what does all of this mean for us, the non-Android listeners, out there in the real world? Where do we go from here?
Well, I think the first step is to recognize that free will, as we actually use and apply the concept, is it's inextricably linked to knowledge, awareness, and the ability to reason and make informed choices.
So we need to be critical thinkers, constantly questioning our assumptions and challenging the information we're being fed. We need to be aware of the potential for manipulation, and strive to make choices that are truly aligned with our own values and goals.
Precisely, and it's also important to remember that free will is it's a spectrum, not a binary. We can always work to enhance our autonomy by expanding our knowledge, improving our reasoning skills, and becoming more aware of the factors that influence our choices.
It's like we're all on a journey towards greater freedom, and every step we take towards self-awareness, critical thinking, and informed decision-making, it brings us closer to that goal.
Right. That's a beautiful way to put it, and I think that's a message worth sharing with our listeners. But before we completely wrap up, I wanted to touch on one more interesting point that came up in our research.
Okay, I'm all ears. What is it?
One of the Reddit discussions we looked at, it brought up the idea that tying free will to our to our nervous system might be a bit of a category error.
A category error. Now you've got me curious. Break that down for me.
Well, think about how we often talk about our brains making decisions as if they're separate entities from ourselves. But in reality, our brains, or at least our minds, are inextricably linked to them.
So it's like saying my hand decided to pick up the coffee when really you decided to pick up the coffee using your hand as an instrument.
Exactly, and this Reddit user argued that the same logic applies to our brains. When we say our brains make decisions, what we really mean is that we make decisions using our brains as the physical mechanism for that process.
That makes a lot of sense. It's all about perspective and understanding that our minds and brains aren't separate entities, but two sides of the same coin.
Precisely, and this perspective really challenges the notion that our brains are somehow making decisions for us, as if we're just passive passengers along for the ride.
It's a powerful reminder that we are ultimately the authors of our own choices, even if those choices are influenced by a complex interplay of factors. But speaking of influences, what about those who argue that our unconscious minds are really calling the shots, making decisions before our conscious minds even catch up? That's the idea that like we're just puppets, kind of controlled by these subconscious desires, and our conscious minds are just along for the ride.
Right. Yeah. It's a popular theory, but as one of the Reddit users pointed out, there's a lot more work to be done to prove that that's actually the case. Just because something happens unconsciously, doesn't automatically mean it's against our will, or that our conscious minds have no say.
So we shouldn't just assume that unconscious processes equal a lack of free will.
Exactly. Think about all the things that happen in our bodies and minds without our conscious awareness. Things like digestion or breathing. We wouldn't say that those are happening against our will.
Right. It's like our conscious minds are the CEO of a company, and the unconscious mind is the team of employees kind of working behind the scenes. The CEO might not be directly involved in every single task, but they set the overall direction and have the authority to override any decisions that don't align with their goals.
That's a fantastic analogy. It shows that the relationship between our conscious and unconscious minds is way more complex than just saying one is in control and the other isn't. It's more of a collaborative effort.
So where does all of this leave us in our quest to understand free will? Are we any closer to an answer?
Well, I think what we've learned today is that the question of free will is much more nuanced than it might seem at first glance. There are strong arguments on both sides, and the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, we've explored everything from philosophical theories and quantum mechanics to real world legal cases and thought experiments with androids. It's been quite a journey.
It really has, and I think the main takeaway here is that free will isn't just about whether our actions are predetermined or not. It's also about knowledge, awareness, the ability to reason and make informed choices. It's about the degree to which we can act in line with our authentic desires and values.
So it's not just about what we choose, but how we choose, and the factors that influence that process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what makes the conversation about free will so important. It challenges us to examine our own beliefs, biases, and motivations. It encourages us to be more critical of the information we're given, and to strive for greater self-awareness and autonomy in our choices.
It's like a call to action, to become more conscious, more deliberate, and more empowered in shaping our own lives.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. But before we go, I'd like to leave our listeners with one final thought to ponder.
A parting shot of wisdom. I'm all ears.
If you could create an artificial intelligence that was so advanced, it could perfectly simulate your brain and predict your every choice, would that prove you have no free will, or would it just be a really, really good prediction? What does that tell us about choice, consciousness, and the limits of our understanding?
Whoa, that's a deep one. It's definitely something for our listeners to think about as they go about their day, making choices and navigating life's complexities.
And who knows, maybe someday, with the help of AI and further exploration of consciousness, we'll finally unlock the secrets of free will. But until then, the debate continues.
And we'll be here to help you navigate it, one deep dive at a time. So keep those brains buzzing, stay curious, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Deep Dive.